Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and today I'm really excited to introduce you to Julie Sheen from Giving Ground Seeds. Now, Giving Ground Seeds is a small seed company that are still shipping and fulfilling orders during COVID-19. And the great thing about this seed company is they're small and they're organics. They produce organic seeds, produce, and even flowers. And they are not too far from where I am in Utah. They're just over into the Idaho border. And they're in the beautiful Snake River Valley area. And they use natural methods of pest control. And they basically produce everything chemical free. And they do a number of different seed varieties, and I just really wanted to introduce you guys to a small seed supplier so we can learn a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes, because when it comes to growing our own food, we really should be thinking about the seeds and having a much more sustainable way to grow our own food, and that all starts with the seed. So just to give you a little bit of background, Julie has a Masters of Education from Portland State University in a leadership for sustainability education. She studied English and horticulture at Utah State University, and she's worked as a garden educator at the Learning Gardens Lab in Portland, Oregon, as Learning Gardens Specialist at Lane Community College in Eugene, Oregon, and at the Utah State University Student Organic Farm. She's worked on numerous farms and gardens in between and has helped organize community and school gardens her whole adult life. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Julie Sheen from Giving Ground Seeds. Part the way through, there is a little bit of some background noise from my dogs, and I apologize for that halfway through, but hopefully you guys can sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Julie. So, welcome, Julie. I'm really, really excited to have you be part of this podcast. So, for my listeners, can you give me a little bit of a background about who you are and what you do at Giving Ground Seeds?
Yeah, so we're a second-year seed company based in southern Idaho, and all our seeds are homestead grown. They're grown on our farm. We grow open-pollinated seeds, rare varieties, and diverse populations like land races. I'm excited to be here today too.
So a lot of the listeners are pretty new to gardening. So can you tell them a little bit about what an open pollinated seed is and how it differs from things like organic seed, and what a landrace is? Because not a lot of gardeners, even ones that have been gardening for a while, know what a landrace is.
Right, yeah. So a couple of different things there. So first is the organic seed. So yes, we are certified organic. That means our seed grows in certified organic conditions. So if you have an organic garden yourself, our seed will be better adapted to those kind of conditions. Usually that's lower fertility or slow release fertility. Usually there's not as much intensive watering going on.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people who have organic gardens seek organic seed because the varieties, their genetics are they've been growing in those kind of conditions, so they're better adapted to thrive in your organic garden. And then the other piece, or one of the other pieces of that question, was the open pollinated seeds. And open pollinated, it's kind of a fancy term, but it's really simple. It basically means you can save seed from that crop. So say you grow a tomato, an open pollinated tomato.
Mm-hmm.
You can save the seed that is right there in the tomato fruit, grow it next year, and expect to see the same traits as the tomato you started with.
Okay.
And that's kind of opposed to a hybrid. Sometimes it's helpful to understand it in terms of its opposite, which is a hybrid. And a hybrid is something that's been bred via crossing two parents, basically. Yep. And people do that, breeders do that for all sorts of reasons. There's maybe different traits they would like. There's maybe proprietary value doing that if you grow a hybrid. Gardeners can't save seed from it, so they always have to come back and buy more seed every year. And with some things, maybe gardeners are totally fine doing that, but it's not as self-sustaining of a cycle. And as we're seeing now, where we're having seed, shortages and companies basically stopping selling seed because their sites are so overwhelmed, you really want at least some of your crops to be able to save seed from them and kind of have that self-sustaining cycle in your own garden. So that's why we're committed to growing open pollinated crops, so that farmers, gardeners can take them and save seed from them. And then the other piece there was land races. And land races are really interesting. They're usually adapted to a specific climate or a specific kind of growing conditions. And because we're an organic farm, most of the land races we grow are suited for that. So they're suited for, like I said, low input, low water situations, but they're very diverse populations. So you might find a squash, for example, where you end up in a landrace with a lot of different sizes and shapes and colors of squash. But the traits that are uniform within that landrace are those that allow them to be adapted to the low water conditions, shorter seasons, maybe lower fertility or slow release fertility from organic matter, that kind of thing. So those are some of the, types of crops that we grow. But just because it's a land race from here doesn't mean it wouldn't do well in your own garden, or a variety that we're growing here doesn't mean it wouldn't do well in your own garden. And that's another reason we grow open pollinated seeds, is because people can save those seeds and adapt them. Over time, they become better adapted. The plants sort of learn and become better adapted to the conditions of your garden.
So tell me a little bit about the climate that you guys are in, because you're not too far from me in Utah, and I have quite a fickle climate, we'll say, because I live at an altitude, so it can be blazing hot one minute and then it can be snowing the next. Do you have some of the same kind of challenges?
We do have some of the same kind of challenges. And that's one reason we started the seed company, is because we couldn't find seed that was coming from anywhere nearby, or even seed that was better adapted to these challenging conditions. So we have a shorter season. In a good year, we probably have 120 frost-free days, probably usually around 100 frost-free days. So that's the focus of a lot of what we grow, is varieties that would be adapted to shorter seasons, but they would, do well in longer seasons as well. We also grow varieties that are adapted to, we're in a high desert climate, and we are irrigated, but some varieties just do better in that dry air. We also heat up really quickly in the springtime, so we don't have these nice long springs that crops like peas or cabbage or broccoli tend to like. We have shorter springs and shorter falls, and then we have this hot summer. So we still grow those crops like peas, lettuce, spinach, but we try to grow varieties that are adapted to either a shorter cool time or varieties that are adapted to the heat.
That's cool. Were you guys always into farming, or did that kind of evolve a little bit later?
We were. So me personally, so it's my husband and I that run the company, and me personally, I started gardening in the educational world. So when I was in college, I worked on our student organic farm, and I kind of got my feet wet there. And then I went on to to Oregon, where I worked in educational gardening some more at a community college and at a Portland public school community garden, kind of teaching others and sharing gardening that way. And that's always been a passion, getting more people into gardening specifically, not necessarily farming, but gardening on a small scale. Because in a lot of ways, I started small. We had these community gardens to be involved in, but other than that, I didn't have land. A lot of the gardening I did to start out with was in other people's backyards. I used other people's greenhouses. Maybe in years they weren't using them. So I definitely relate to like the home gardener experience of, trying to find more space to grow, trying to find greenhouse space, and being involved in community gardens. And then we moved here and bought our farm. And then we finally, had land of our own to start something on a larger scale.
So that's really interesting that you guys started very much kind of grassroots in a backyard, just like a lot of our listeners. That's how I grow. I'm in a suburban area in a backyard. My husband will not let me take over the entire backyard with plants, although I would if he didn't say no. But I'm really curious because since the pandemic, there's a huge increase in the number of first-time home gardeners. And you touched on that earlier where, some of these bigger seed companies are closing their doors. You can't order seeds online and, they're very difficult to get hold of. So, as a new gardener, what kind of plants would you recommend? And, why are some of those plants ideal for a first-time grower?
Yeah, definitely. There are definitely some crops that are easier to grow than others. And it depends a little bit on your climate. So, if you're listening from somewhere else, you might want to kind of ask your neighbors what they're growing. But in general, some of the things that are easiest to grow, I would say for first-time gardeners, are seeds that germinate pretty easily without a lot of babying. Mm-hmm. And things that you don't need a greenhouse to start. And also things that sometimes I just think larger seeds are easier for people to start out with. Like I said, things that don't require a ton of babying to germinate. So I would say things like peas, radishes, spinach, even lettuce, and cucumbers are always a good thing to start with. We have a beginner gardening package of seeds that we sell. And that's what we put in it, just basically those 5 or 6 things to start out with. Beans can be a pretty easy one to start with as well. And sometimes starting with those easier things and getting success early, like it's encouraging versus trying something way out there that not even your neighbors are growing. Start small and start with some of the easier things.
And so some of those veggies are relatively straightforward to grow, right? They don't necessarily have a lot of problems with, pests and diseases. I mean, some areas they might, like if you've got a lot of slugs and snails, but relatively speaking, they're pretty low maintenance crops, right?
That's right. Yeah. Pretty low maintenance. They're easy to know when to harvest them. Yeah.
And what's some of your favorite crops to grow?
Well, I love the variety of tomatoes, and that's a thing that a lot of people are into. Even before they start gardening, a lot of people, that's kind of the gateway drug into gardening. They want to grow tomatoes they can't find at the grocery store.
See, so the tomatoes, the American version of the potato. So in England, it's potatoes that are like the gateway drug plant, which I always found really funny.
That is funny. And I really respect that because I love to, being in Idaho, I love to grow potatoes, and we grow a wide variety of potatoes that we sell at our local farmers market. And I think homegrown potatoes are so much better than store-bought. But it's true. It's not something that is really popular here. But yeah, I would say tomatoes. And I also like to grow the brassica family. So that includes like broccoli and cabbage. Some of those things can be a little bit trickier around here, but if you find the right variety, you'll usually have really good success.
That's really cool to hear that there's you know, a lot of opportunity for people even in short season areas to be able to grow a lot of these things. Do you have a lot of challenges growing some of these warm weather crops outside? I know I've got friends up in Canada who have to, you know, grow things in a greenhouse all the time, but it sounds like that's not really an issue for where you're at.
Well, we definitely start a lot of our plants in the greenhouse. Definitely the tomatoes and all the warm season stuff. We get a head start in the greenhouse. And then in the field, we do use things like row cover in the early stages and in the late stages of the season. So that's basically just like almost like a sheet, a little bit lighter than a sheet. It's agricultural grade row cover, but in a home garden, you know, if you get a cold night, you can just put a sheet on whatever needs covering. So we do use season extension like that a little bit. There's a lot of benefits to being in a shorter season. Sometimes we have less pest issues because it frosts. I mean, we certainly have less pest issues because, you know, if you think about it, half the year we can't even be accumulating these pest populations. And in places like California or something, it can be a lot harder to grow, or even the tropics, it can be really hard to grow vegetables there because of just the year-round pest pressure. So I think there's a lot of benefits, and you know, preserving food is something more and more people are getting into too, canning and making sauerkraut and things like that.
For sure. Now, I did scope you guys out on Instagram a little bit before I bought seeds from you, because I found you guys through the open source seed initiative in looking for kind of local seeds and things. And I was really curious because there's a picture, and I think it's also on your about page, where there's, I think it's cabbages, and there's like white flowers in between them. So I kind of wanted to know what was going on in that picture. Have you kind of planted them together, and why did you do that?
Yeah, we definitely do quite a bit of intercropping like that. And so basically that's what intercropping is to take maybe a couple different species and plant them together, and hopefully they benefit each other. We do a lot of the beneficial flowers. I'm not sure which flower that would have been. I'm trying to think back, but we do a lot of beneficial flowers that attract beneficial insects, like marigolds are a pretty famous example. And that's another easy thing to grow if gardeners want to throw that into the garden. They really attract beneficial insects and predatory insects. So we try to encourage predatory insect habitat because they help keep some of that pest pressure lower. So they'll eat, you know, things like ladybugs are a famous example, but also spiders, praying mantis, the larvae of various species. They will eat pest insects like aphids. And on things like cabbages, anyone around here who's grown cabbage or broccoli knows they can really get aphids.
Oh, yeah.
So if we intersperse them with some of the flowers that some of these insects like, because a lot of these insects, they are omnivorous. So they'll eat the aphids, and then they'll go over and drink the nectar from these flowers. So they're attracted by the flowers. They're attracted by, by the flowers and by the nectar. And then they'll also, you know, travel over and eat the aphids. So we do quite a bit of intercropping like that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we're always experimenting. And if gardeners want to try that at home, like I said, marigolds are a great place to start.
And they look so pretty with all the vegetables growing as well. So yeah, marigolds are a great one to start with. Now, you guys don't just grow for seeds, right? I mean, you know, we see all these beautiful pictures that you guys have of all these veggies and stuff. Do you let all of that go to seed, or are you eating some of that? How is that working?
Yeah, at this time, the field is probably 50-50 as of last year, but this year more of it's going to seed than before, just because we grow for seed contracts for some larger certified organic seed companies as well. So, but we do have a market stand here, our local market, where we sell fresh produce, and we're scaling that back a little bit in order to scale the seeds up more. But that is something we enjoy doing. We get a lot of feedback about the flavor of different varieties and how people like to enjoy them. And that's kind of invaluable. It also helps us stay connected with our local community. And we'll still be doing some of our bulk crops like potatoes and garlic at the market, but more of the field is going towards seed now. And I think that's a lot of transitions that seed companies make. They'll start kind of growing produce while they're accumulating their seed stock and kind of figuring out which varieties they want to be growing for seed and things like that, and then transition away from it and more into seed.
Did you find selling things at the farmers market that there were varieties that were loved a lot more by people because of the taste?
I think so. For example, like golden beets. That's something you can't find in the grocery store, at least our grocery stores here. And people were just crazy about the golden beets. Oh, wow. And it's something that it'd be hard to predict, just being out here and growing on our own without having that interaction. So, yeah, that's something like in the future we want to do a seed crop of, because it's obviously popular with people and we want to get more people growing it.
Oh yeah, that's pretty neat. Like golden beets, I bet they look really pretty from the regular hard bright red beets that you get at the grocery store.
Yeah, I think so.
So can you share a little bit about behind the scenes of a seed company? Like what really kind of goes on in the background? Because most of us who are gardening, we don't really connect with the seed itself, really, let alone like what goes into producing that seed. So I'm really interested for our listeners to kind of get an understanding of what really goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, even when I started gardening, I really didn't think about where the seeds were coming from. And a lot of times when I'll tell people like where that we're growing seeds, they don't understand the phrase like growing seeds, because they don't really think of seeds as something that are grown like you would a crop. But the easiest way to explain kind of how it works here is to just kind of walk you through the seasons quickly. So this time of year, just like any other farm, any produce farm or fresh market farm, we're planting all our crops. And in addition to planting the seeds of the crops that we're growing, we're planting some of the biennial roots that we've been saving in the root cellar. And these are seed crops that take 2 years to mature. So right now we're planting carrot roots and beet roots and onion bulbs. And those look just like a carrot, basically. And you just stick it in the ground and that will flower and become the seeds this year.
Oh, wow. So, that's quite labor intensive. I didn't realize you had to dig them all up and put them back in the ground.
Yeah, in this climate you do. In other climates, they can leave them out the entire year if the winters are mild enough. But here, yeah, we lift them in the fall and we put them in the root cellar and then bring them out when it's a good time in the spring and plant them out. And that's a good chance for us to kind of evaluate. We can cut into the root a little bit, make sure it's the right color, and plant it back out if it's what we're looking for, and maybe just keep it and eat it if it's not. So right now we're planting those out. We're planting the seeds of our seed crops. And basically just like a garden, we'll grow those crops. But the main thing that's different is when it comes time to harvest them as fresh, we basically just keep them there. So think of like a pea pod. We just leave that pea pod on the vine those seeds within the pea pod will mature, they will dry out, and this is kind of across the board with crops like that, like peas or beans, and we'll leave them to dry out. And in the fall, we do a ton of seed harvesting.
Mm-hmm.
So September, August, even into July, seeds are maturing, and different crops mature at different times. And we'll bring those in and we'll start to process them. So we harvest the seed crops. Basically, if we go back to the pea example, we pull the vine and everything and all those dried out pea pods off. And then we go into cleaning the seeds. So when you get the seed packet, you just have the peas in there, right? You don't have all the plant material. So we clean off all the plant material. And it's different for every crop. Like tomatoes, they're obviously encased in a wet fruit.
Mm-hmm.
So processing them is completely different than processing corn or beans or even squash. But that's kind of what the fall looks like, is harvesting seed and then processing them. And luckily, you know, we have a diverse seed field. We're growing a lot of different crops. So the work is kind of spaced out through the whole fall. So when one thing's maturing, we can be getting that and cleaning it and then on to the next thing. And then we pack the seeds.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and then we just pack the seeds in packets, and that's basically our gardening year.
And is it quite easy for home gardeners to be saving seed and learn to do that themselves, or do they need quite a big number of plants to start doing that? Because you kind of read, you know, a lot about seed saving, and it's like, oh, you need, you know, 50 plants. Well, for a home gardener, that's quite a lot of seed.
Right. Well, for some things, you do want kind of a large population like that. For things like outcrossers, like corn is a good example, spinach is a good example, you know, cabbage is a good example. But then for a lot of other things like the inbreeders, and this is something you probably just want to look at a chart to identify which crops are inbreeders and which crops are outcrossers that need that large population. But some inbreeders, like they only need one plant, and as long as you have one plant, you can save seed from that. And that would be things like peas and beans, and even tomatoes. If you have a couple plants, you can save from. Lettuce is another example. So it's kind of like gardening itself. Seed saving, it's something you can just, the only way to learn how to do it is to do it. And some things definitely are easier than others. So plan to start with maybe something easy like peas or beans. Yeah.
Are they some of your favorites to save seed from because they're easy?
Yes, and they grow really well in this climate, and they're also a staples crop that you can dry down. And I also feel like they don't get a lot of attention. There's a lot of interesting varieties of peas out there, for example, that you don't find in seed catalogs, but that are super interesting, have definitely interesting traits. So that's one reason I'm kind of drawn to peas.
Yeah.
Is there's a ton of variety out there that is sort of undiscovered.
See, now I'm really interested in peas because, you know, when I was a kid, my grandmother always used to grow sweet peas growing up. And, you know, I always remember how pretty and beautiful they always smelt, but I know that you can't eat them. And when it came to peas were like one of those crops that I just plain old refused to eat as a kid. But now, like, you know, there's snap peas, there's potting peas, there's drying peas. Like, what are some of your favorites?
Yeah, I really love the snow peas, the flat peas that most people are familiar with them in Asian cooking, but they're used all over the world basically. And you can eat the pod. So we have a Swenson Swedish snow pea, That's a very nice snow pea. We also have a few dry pea varieties. We have wild pea of Umbria. And these are peas that you let dry just like you would if you're saving seed. And then they're typically eaten in like soups or split and then eaten as split peas. And I really like those because it gives you something to eat over the winter that you grew in your garden. And yeah.
Oh, that's great. And I know there's a lot of people looking at, things that they can grow this year and then store over winter to kind of harvest off, especially given, the climate and how everything's kind of unfolding at the moment. So I'd love to send some of my listeners over to you. So where can they connect with you?
Yeah, so our website is the easiest way. It's givinggroundseeds.com, and that's just all one word. And you can also find us on Instagram at Giving Ground and at Giving Ground Seeds, I think it is actually. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate so much you spending some time with me today to talk about some of these things and, giving us a bit of an insight into what it really is that you guys do and, how you support producing, seed and food for so many people. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners?
That the easiest way to start gardening is just to start. A lot of people think about it for years and are intimidated by it, but don't be intimidated, just get into it. Don't focus on the beautiful pictures on Instagram of what everybody's growing. Just be happy with what you're growing and realize it takes a little while to learn how to do it, and you're always learning, but the best way to do it is just to start and enjoy how it goes and kind of enjoy the process.
Oh, that's perfect. It's so very true. Thank you ever so much, Julie. I appreciate everything. Make sure you check out the description and the show notes for links mentioned in this episode, and head on over to givinggroundseeds.com to go visit Julie and see what seeds she has available. I hope you found this episode informative and interesting, and until next time, I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and I hope that your garden grows beautifully. I'll see you next week.